Hi again. Here we are to continue our discussion of creating UI components with Swift and Xcode. And so far we have a pretty good looking component here. It looks like this. And if we test it, we can change the slider here, right? Or this line can draw itself around the arc. You know, we can do this and it changes. And if we swipe, it changes, right? There's one more thing we got to do. Now, when I'm swiping here, this changes, but it doesn't change the slider, right? But if I change the slider, it changes this thing. Now, the reason this works is because the reason the slider works is because it can emit messages. So when we drag the slider, it can send a message to our view controller to say like, hey, I changed. Right? And then, then we can ask it like, hey, what's your new value? And let's use that value to update something on the screen, like this widget, right? Okay. But our component, when we change it, it doesn't emit a message saying that I've changed, right? So we can make it do that, just like this guy does. Another reason here that we want to do this is because you'll notice that the slider has an IBAction, right? This is where the slider changes, right? This is how we know. I've opened up View Controller here in the Assistant Editor, right? I just option clicked on it, right? So you don't just make an IBAction and then everything's hunky-dory and it all works. Really, what you did is you control drag from the slider into your View Controller, and what happened is the computer saw that the slider can send messages, right? It can send messages for these event types, and there's a whole list of them here when we look at the event menu in the, if you change this to action and you look at event, you can see them all there, right? And then we can pick one of them. And really, this is just a function, but the slider is going to call on that function, right? And this is a pattern, like a software design pattern called Observer, if I recall, right? I think it's called Observer. And you could write your own observer pattern, right? It's like a common thing in software. You have, an element that wants to notify any number of other objects, or you have one object that wants to notify any number of other objects that a change occurred or that an event happened, right? It could be all kinds of different events, right? In our case, this is a changed event, right? So, we can have our widget or our UI, component issue events also, right? So how does that work? Well, the target action, they call it target action, but that's the observer pattern, right? They call it target action. The target action method is built into a class in UIKit, and the class that it's built into is UIControl. So any class that subclasses UIControl gets the target action system, right? And actually, pretty much all the components, or almost all of them, subclass UI control. So, like the slider is a UI control, and so is, I think, button is UI control, segmented controller, switch, all those guys are UI control. So actually, why don't we make our class a subclass of UI control, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the circle path. Let me close the Assistant Editor here. And our circle path subclass is UI view, but actually UI control subclass is UI view, right? So really, UI view goes to UI control, right? So what we're going to do is we're just going to make this a UI control, right? And then we're also a UI view, okay? But now we can use the target action method. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here, and where we do the swipe, so I just changed this up here. Instead of UI view, we're going to be a UI control now. And then I'm going to scroll down and find our touch event. Touch is moved in particular, right? And what I want to do is I want to do a send action. Okay, and it's send actions for control events, right? So this is the method that we want to call. We want to say send actions for control events, and we get this because it belongs to UI control. Okay, so we'll choose this, and then we'll say value changed is our control event. Okay, and there's a bunch of built-in events. These are actually just, I think these are all just strings. Let's see. Doesn't really say. I think these are strings though, so you can actually use any string value here, I think. I'm used to JavaScript. In JavaScript, all the events are strings, so I'm kind of guessing it's the same thing here. They just have an enum for it. But we can use any of the built-in ones too, and some of the built-in ones make sense. So like if we use one of the built-in sets, then a lot of the things kind of act the same way, and that's kind of what you expect. Like, you know, when the slider changes, it sends out value changed. And when our thing changes, it's kind of like value change. It's kind of the same thing. So we're just going to use the same event right here. Okay, so now anybody can register with our class for a value changed event, and then you know, when we change the value, when on touch is moved, we can send out an event to tell everybody, notify all of our listeners that we've changed, right? So what we'll do is we'll go to control now. Let's actually do this. Let's go to storyboard, and then we'll option click on view controller, and then what we'll do is we'll control drag from our component to our view controller class. Like this is view controller over here, right? And then I'll switch this to action, and then the event that I want to send is value changed, right? And then we can say circle path changed will be the name of our event, and we can set this to type circle path and click connect. Now our thing emits, it can work with IBAction, can emit events, right? So when we change this, what do we want to do? We want to update the slider, right? So just in the same way that we had the slider update the circle path, we want to have, we want to say slider. Oh, you know what? I got to have an IB outlet for slider. Why don't we add that? We got to put that in here. So let's actually do this. Let's control drag from slider up here and give it an outlet, right? And we'll call it slider, right? So now we got slider outlets. Now we can say, now back in here on circle path changes, we'll do slider.value equals circle path dot value, and this should be the lowercase circle path, right? Because that's our variable. Uppercase circle path is the class itself. So we'll say value. So there we go. Now when the value changes here, we'll change the value on the slider. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Let's give it a test, right? So now we'll drag this, and you can see when I get to 0, the slider goes to 0, and when I go all the way across, the slider goes to 100. Right? And then if I drag the slider, it changes the thing up here, right? So anyway, so there you go. We're using the UI control now, and we're using the target action method or the observer pattern to pass events around and notify our listeners of updates. Okay. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope that is helpful.